today, Marissa Gonzales. She is a third-year Ph.D. student with HCC, and she does work with Dr. Ashok Goel. And I think her general interests, you said, are in the area of discovering new models of learning in online education, which is much related to the topic today, which is particular perceptions and practices of students in OMSCS. So I'll hand it over to Marissa now to take it from here. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming. My computer decided to take a nap, so let's wake it up. Okay, there we go. All right. Right, so I'm going to talk today about desired learning behaviors in online education, specifically in OMSCS. A lot of the data that we're going to talk about today and kind of the things we're going to analyze deal with one class in particular, but we are expanding into some of the other courses in OMSCS starting this semester, so that's very exciting. I'm very excited about that. I hope you can tell. Right, so a couple things I want to start off with. Just a quick outline of the talk overall. I will be going over just very briefly some of the concerns with online education as we know them today. What we call the OMSCS approach. So what did OMSCS do differently? And then how can we see that kind of carried out in the courses themselves, like the knowledge-based AI course here, taught by Ashok in their corner. And then I'll go over some research that I've done. What I'm coining basically is the student engagement survey, followed up by our topic, which is desired learning behaviors, and finally moving forward, which is with the community of inquiry model, and I'll be going through all of that. So concerns with online education, just very briefly. There's a couple things we know about online education that are kind of obstacles, I would call them at least. For one, we have low student engagement in a lot of different forms and models of online education. We have little feedback, if any, and maybe little to no expert feedback, which can be very difficult for students who are trying to learn particularly difficult material. We have very little guidance and support. So who do students go to when they have a problem, when they have like a pain point? Where do they find that information for them to move past it? There's cost trade-offs. A very common example of online education today is MOOCs, right? So massive open online courses, which are free and open, but then they lack structure and they lack those extra feedback and all that. The opposite end are you can get online degrees at a variety of institutions here or all across the world, but they're very expensive, right? So you get structure, but then you'll end up paying maybe $5,000 a course. And so that is a huge obstacle for a lot of people. There's a huge problem with student retention in online education. The rates for retention are very low. Up to like only 10% of people who actually take, like for example, MOOCs, actually finish the MOOC through, and that's thousands of people. And finally, just the nature of online education is that it's asynchronous. And so there's problems with how do we keep students engaged and how do we incentivize communication so we can get that community of learners that we want towards getting higher student performance and learning overall. So the OMSCS model, Georgia Tech decided that they were going to make an online program for a master's in computer science. And they kind of did it from an approach where they not only identified a new class of learners, individuals who are otherwise excluded from going back and getting a degree, they did it in a way that it was at low cost, they could do on their time, and had a high quality education comparable to that here on campus. So OMSCS piloted or started, I think it launched in May of 2013, yeah. And to date has over 6,000 enrolled students. And just some rough demographics, it's about 15% underrepresented minorities, about 15% women, and represents 99 countries in the world, so people from all over the place are enrolled. So it's fairly successful in that regard, right? There's a lot of people in it. There's a lot of students who are very happy with the education that they're getting through it. Granted, this is higher education, but these are individuals who otherwise had no ability to go back and get their education, who wanted to go back and get a degree because they had families, they couldn't, move to somewhere they could get to an affordable school. So there's just so many other reasons, but so we see a lot of that here. The course that we are really talking about today is knowledge-based artificial intelligence. This is one of the most popular courses in the OMSCS program. It's often one of the first courses that students will take when enrolling in the program. It's different than maybe the traditional approach to artificial intelligence. I say traditional, but it's really not. Knowledge-based AI is more traditional because it's modeled after human cognition, whereas a lot of what people understand as artificial intelligence today, they kind of leads more toward the machine learning end. So this course is taught in the OMSCS program by Ashok Goel and Dr. David Joyner, and it takes a lot of different methods and kind of pedagogical approaches to how do we teach people online. Explicitly, so I should say, it was explicitly designed, right, to enhance this learning experience for users and for students. It adopted a bunch of methods that we know work really well for increasing student productivity, increasing student performance, and then practices and perceptions of the course overall. And then also it was a great place to kind of pilot some new technologies and new ways of testing and understanding how we can influence that student learning experience. And I'll go over a couple of those a little bit later. But just a couple examples are, for example, virtual teaching assistants, virtual research assistants, and then nano-tutors, which I call here cognitive tutoring agents, but they're micro, tiny, little specific exercises that are embedded in these videos that you use online as part of the lecture experience. And I should go over real quick, in an online classroom, what do we mean when we say online classroom, right? In residence, when you're on campus, you go to a lecture hall and you have a classroom. In KBAI, like other courses in OMSCS, your classroom is your discussion forum. It's where you go to interact with other students and kind of talk and go over different topics and things like that. And so that's where you actually see a lot of some of these technologies coming through, particularly the virtual teaching assistant, to kind of work with students and go through that. So KBAI is just one example. There are many other OMSCS courses that follow this model, though, of how do we emulate the traditional experience in an online virtual space. So there's some motivations behind KBAI when it was first developed, and the first of is we wanted to kind of, I think Ashok, your idea was to broaden participation in KBAI, to bring it to more students, and this is a fantastic opportunity to do that because so many students are enrolled in the OMSCS program. But also, we wanted to go over using research methods from the learning sciences to kind of adopt new, pedagogy for teaching in an online space, in a virtual space. A lot of learning science research has issues and concerns with online learning. So how can we approach that from new perspectives? How can we adapt those methodologies and pedagogies so that we can get good results? And that was kind of our idea here, was can we do that here? We wanted to conduct research in online learning. It's the perfect time to do it, and it's the perfect place. There's a lot of students, there's a lot of data, and so we decided, hey, let's do it. And finally, and this will come up, to do some AI research as well, because fundamentally we are AI researchers in our lab. There's quite a few of us. But there is this question here about approaching education from a different perspective, right? Looking at some of the problems that we have in learning online from a different lens, and how can that produce new solutions to known problems, or can it help us identify new problems so that we can seek those solutions? Just this is real quick, but this is a basic structure breakdown of KBAI, and it's not too dissimilar from many other courses in the OMSCS program, which is it's a full term, right? So the full semester course, and the lectures come through videos online that you can go through and have, so you can go through them at your leisure. And within the KBAI videos specifically, there are interactive exercises for students to go through, and many of them have nano-tutors involved so that they can get immediate feedback on what their current understanding of the content is. And so that kind of formative assessment is critical to students developing a sound understanding of the material itself. So that's just, again, this is just real brief so you get an understanding of what goes on in the course. So now that this course is out there, it's been out there for a couple years, some researchers in the lab were wondering, is this efficient, right? Is this effective learning? Are students actually learning in this course? And so there's been a number of research that's gone on in our lab, and so I'm going to go over that a little bit before I jump into some of mine. Ashok and David both did, they worked together to do kind of an analysis over several years, understanding how does the online version of KBAI compare to the on-campus version. And from 2004 through 2016, they were very comparable. I mean, just real close. At 1 year, OMSCS just outperformed the KBAI on-campus students. The next year, the on-campus students just barely outperformed OMSCS. But in general, as you can see from the data here, they are very close. If you just look at the means, online mean and the residential mean, and then the difference on the end there, they're very close. And so this is good. This is to us as an indicator, right, that we are seeing some of the same performance, of the student performance. And then we have our very own Chahua's work. So Chahua did some research looking at how students perceived those video lessons, considering that's where they get the bulk of their course material or their course understanding. So how do they feel about these video lessons, particularly because we know that they have those extra components such as the interactive exercises and those nano-tutors. And what she found was that students had very high perceptions of these video lessons, that they found them very effective. And perhaps most important is that they found them more effective and more helpful than some of the video lessons in other courses or other online courses. And you can see that down here, both OMSCS and non-OMSCS. So that was very interesting to us. We also have some work done by another member in our lab, Ida. She did some work on post complexity, and what she did was she analyzed posts in the online discussion forum for discourse quality and for sentiment analysis. Those together combined make what we call the complexity of the posts themselves. And what she found for the online section was that the posts are relatively high quality. However, what's interesting was that as the class grew, that post quality or the complexity started to drop. And so there's this interesting question there: what is the threshold for quality of discussion that you need in order to have high performance? Does it need to be the highest possible quality if you're getting more interaction? So the idea here is that this is opening up many doors to many questions, right? It's like we didn't know these things before, now we do. How is that going to inform how we go about approaching the discussion forum section, which is our classroom in the online course? There was also, dealing with the discussion forum from Joshua Killingsworth. He analyzed how post interactions on the forum affected student engagement and student performance in the class. So the first graph you'll see here is actually the student response time. So when a student posts a question, that margin for when a TA responds, how quickly or how slow, is here on the x-axis, and the y-axis is their overall activity in the forum. So what we found was that if a TA, or a virtual TA, posts relatively quickly to the students, the interactions on the forums skyrocket. So they'll continue to interact over time, which is good. We want more interaction, because as we know, as educators, that interaction tends to lead to more construction of knowledge. The second graph we have here was actually, we're seeing student activity and then student grade. And so what we saw was that there's a correlation between the amount of activity they're having and then their higher grades in the course, so their overall performance. And lastly, we can see that the time to comment, so the time response, like it was here in this one, to student grades and student performance. And so we're seeing this kind of linear correlation between what we're thinking is response time and student grades. If we respond quicker and get back to students quicker, and we can do that if we can do that consistently, will we see a consistent rise in student performance in the course? And finally, one of the things that we've done, and this kind of coincided with my work, was we did a survey analysis of CIOS. I'm sure all of us are fairly familiar with CIOS, and if not, it's the course instructor opinion surveys that are at the end of every term. Students fill them out and give their opinions on the course. And something interesting that we found was that in 2017, the OMSCS students for KBAI were very positive about this course, but actually they were more positive than even the on-campus students. And so that's interesting to us, is because we want to know why. They used very positive polar words, and this is just briefly goes over it, but what she basically found was there's a high correlation between those positive words and the perceptions that we'll go over in just a minute. So when I came into Ashok's lab and I heard about Jill Watson, the virtual teaching assistant, I was fascinated. I was like, wow, we're at that point now where we can interact with intelligent agents online and they can help us get to that more personalized education that we all kind of want and we're aiming for. But I had a question, a fundamental question, I think, about the impact of that on student perceptions in the course. And kind of what does it feel like as a student when you find out that this TA that you've been interacting with for the last 16 weeks is not actually a person? And so this question opened up a larger door for me, which was, what are student perceptions in online education, particularly in OMSCS and in KBAI? And do they change from the beginning to the end? Will we see that change? And then how does it look like after we've revealed who the TA is, right? That they know who the virtual TA is. And so this was a project I did last year or so in 2017. Spring 2017 and fall 2017, gathered data from the KBAI class. It was self-reported data. It was a survey. So we'll be going over that. The survey that I used was adapted from the MSLQ survey, which is made by Pintrick and DeGroot. This is the Motivated Strategies in Learning questionnaire. And what it basically goes over are motivational components and self-regulated learning components. So motivation and self-regulation are two critical components for success in education, but particularly in online education. And so this is a very popular survey. It's a very popular instrument for use in surveying students in all classrooms, but more recently has been used in a lot of online education research. So I used some of the identified subscales from this survey and adapted to include an additional scale on the perceptions of learning assistants in the course, particularly because we were asking questions about a virtual teaching assistant. So the 4 scales that we used for our survey were self-efficacy, intrinsic value, cognitive strategy use, and learning assistance. Self-efficacy, for those who may not know, is basically your belief, the level of belief that you have that you can complete a task. Intrinsic value is how much value you put in that task or the completion of that task. Cognitive strategy use is the use of different strategies such as rehearsal, note-taking, review, reflection, those kinds of things, such that you can get to a state of cognitive engagement. And cognitive engagement is one of the key indicators for self-regulated learning. And finally, learning assistance, like I said, was the confidence students have in the assistance they were provided during their course. There's a couple questions we had going into this. The first was, is there a change in student-reported measures of self-efficacy and these other motivated or self-regulated components from the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester? I wanted to know how those things measured going in, and I want to know how they measured going out. The students are exposed to a lot of material over the duration of that course, but a lot of tools too. A lot of tools and a lot of other students. Remember, this is a whole new program, so I was very interested and intrigued in how do they feel and how do these things affect these perceptions. Research question number 2 here was, how do students measure their confidence in learning assistance after learning the identity of the VTA? And are there any other correlations between the component measures, right? So do we see one raise, we see another raise? Just real quick, so this is a very brief breakdown of some of the data that I found from the 2 semesters. The first semester we did not get many students to respond because, well, first off, it was a paired test, so I needed the student to do both first and end. But because this was voluntary, not a lot did it. That's no longer an issue. I'm happy to report that the surveys that we're doing now, we're having a lot of students take, and that's great. But for this data, for spring 2017, we didn't have too many who took it, but it was still an interesting analysis to kind of see what was going on. And then fall 2017, we had quite a much larger number. So let's get a little bit into what do these mean, right? What is the important parts of this? So we'll look at our p-value here. Basically what we found was self-efficacy in both semesters did have a statistically significant increase from the beginning to the end of term. This is interesting to us because we revealed the TA before they took this survey. And that actually reflected in some of the comments that we saw in the CIOS surveys, which were, I had no idea they were TA. You know, it was very interesting. I didn't know they were virtual TA. It was very interesting to see that. And so it didn't affect their self-efficacy, and that was great for us. We wanted to make sure that that was not the case. Another thing to point out was the effect size here, is that it was important to me to see that this wasn't a tiny effect size, right? That it didn't make a difference. And so what we have here is a moderate effect size. That's great. That's what we want to see. We also did a correlation test on these things. Actually, one thing I want to point out, I just think is worth pointing out, is that you'll notice there's actually another statistically significant value down here on intrinsic value in fall 2017. Now, when I first saw this, I panicked, right? Because it was actually a decrease. And I was like, wait, why would they have less value, right? Why would they find less value at the end of the term than at the beginning of the term? Well, it wasn't that they found less value. It was that it wasn't what they expected. And so students had understood this as, I thought this class was going to do was one thing, it was another thing. It didn't change how they felt about the class overall, but it just hadn't, it wasn't what they thought it was going in. And so it did change how they valued that course, which is interesting to me. But anyway, so yeah, so correlations, this is interesting. We'll just throw out a correlation here, is that there is some correlations across the board on all measures. And you can, I point out the strength of the association so you can kind of understand what this means. But the important bit here is the coefficient value, so we can see if it's statistically significant or not. We do have across the board, this is all, by the way, I should mention, that it's cognitive strategy use, intrinsic value, and the teaching assistantship correlating to self-efficacy. So I was very interested in how those things related to self-efficacy specifically. Did they have a relation? So we do see some correlations and the fact that they are statistically significant. After all of this, I started to really wonder, to what extent does KBAI encourage student use of desired learning behaviors? Because those measures that I had measured before are indicators of desired learning behaviors. Both self-regulated learning and motivated components, so things like self-efficacy and cognitive strategies, intrinsic value, are usually the indicators we look for when we're trying to understand, is this student getting what they need, right? Is there efficient learning going on? And so I was wondering, what are some other ways that we can go about, investigating this issue? Can we go deeper? And I wanted to go deeper. So this is kind of where we're at now. Is the presence of desired learning behaviors in KBAI indicative of effective learning? Well, let's get a working definition of what we mean, like I just said, of desired learning behaviors. And I'll break it down for you a little bit. So working off of Pintrick and DeGroot's original working definitions of these two components, I'll get into. The motivation components that we're going to be using is based off of a general expectancy value model. And so what we have here is expectancy, which is essentially your self-efficacy, your self-beliefs. We have value, which is how are you valuing this experience and this education that you're getting, you're receiving, and your affective state, so your emotions, your feelings about it overall. We also have self-regulated regulation components, and that deals with metacognitive strategies such as reflection I mentioned earlier. And then also your ability to regulate your cognitive state. Are you engaged or are you not? And that deals with management. What ways do you go about engaging and kind of managing that state? And finally, the cognitive strategies themselves. What are the actions that you take, those practices that you have that lead you to being in that state prolonged? And is that related to the different motivation components that you have? And we know from previous research that these things are linked, right? But I was interested in are they existing? Do they exist? Do they manifest in the KBAI course? And further, what's impacting them? Like what's influencing them? How do we get them there? How do we get them to the levels that we want? So I was like, okay, how can we measure these things? So there's two ways. The first is we could just do the qualitative approach, right? Which is to use validated instruments such as the MSLQ or other to measure these things in students, and then to cross-check them with student performance to see if there's some correlations. And that's fine, we can do that. I'm doing that currently. There's also another way, which is something I'm also doing, which is to utilize a theoretical framework. The reason I want to do this is because I believe it will provide me some common terminology and kind of a map to which we can use to figure out exactly what's happening in different sectors of the course, what parts of the course, what parts of the tools, et cetera, are influencing or impacting specific practices or specific perceptions that we have in students. So I introduced to you the community of inquiry framework. Just a rough, how many of you are familiar with community of inquiry framework? Okay, good. So a couple, that's good, okay. So community of inquiry framework, what is it? Some people are like, it's theory, some are like, it's a framework. I tend to fall between the two. It was designed by Garrison, Anderson, and Archer in about 2000. The point of this was to develop a learning community that could produce purposeful discourse, right? So this collaboration of individuals in the community towards co-construction of knowledge. And you see a lot of this in education. And right now, it's probably one of the more hot topics for online education, so it's particularly useful. It was originally I guess it was described under 3 dimensions, which are social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence. And to kind of understand those things, social presence is how you interact with other peers around you and become and identify with a community of learners. Your cognitive presence is how you use the content material and what's made available to you. And finally, teaching presence is the presence of the instructor themselves and their impact on the overall learning experience. And I use this, this next model here, which is overlaid with different interaction types to make that a little bit more clear. And these interaction types are actually argued by Dr. Karen Swan to help people understand exactly why these things are interconnected the way that they are. And so the place we want to be, right, is right there in the middle, right, between all of them coming together. And that's when you get, according to the community inquiry model, that's when you get that most efficacious style of learning. So I want to know is, if we took these dimensions and added 2 more dimensions, what would it look like? So these are 2 more dimensions that were actually argued by two other researchers, Dan Bonick and Peter Shea. The first is being system presence, is that this is an online classroom we're dealing with. We need to understand how the system, right, interactions with the system impact those student perceptions and practices as well, because it's an integral part of it. But also learner presence, and this deals more, again, with that kind of self-efficacy, those motivational components, is that needs to be highlighted a little bit more inside the community of inquiry model, because they're currently, in its original state, there wasn't much of that, but it's a critical part of the learning experience. So I offer this, which is the new model, which just basically brings them all together. And what we have here is the model that we intend to use to understand and look at the courses in the OMSCS course, or in the OMSCS program. So for example, if we took KBAI and looked at teaching presence here, what are some questions that we could think about, or how do we begin to categorize what's going on with the tools and the design of KBAI? Well, we could ask, how does the class design support teacher-student interactions? So what are all the ways and what are all the different tools made available such that that's possible? Does Jill Watson impact student perceptions of teacher immediacy in KBAI? So we know that teacher immediacy, for those who, I'm assuming, but if you don't know, teacher immediacy is the presence of the teacher that the student can tell is going on. So how does the student perceive the teacher being there or not? It does impact how they feel about the course overall and their student performance. And so one thing we've wondered is, Jill Watson's interacting with students in the course whenever they are there and they make a post or comment. Does that impact the student's sense of teacher immediacy? And social presence, though 2 things that most education researchers were really concerned about when it came to online education, was how do those presences manifest? Well, will an artificial agent impact those, and will it be a positive impact, a positive change? We could also ask, what tools do instructors use to interact with students? This is different from the first one, because the first one is an all-encompassing, what's made available, what all can they do? The second one, the third one, the bottom there is, what's actually happening? What tools are being used? Are they using tools that we didn't expect them to use? Are they doing something new that we could not have thought of? And so these are the kinds of things that we can think of. Let's look at cognitive presence. This is another one. What are the different tools made available to students to interact with the course content? So this is basically, this boils down what came in the learning management system, but also what did we add, and how are students using them? So do students find embedded Nano-tutors helpful? This is an ongoing question right now. I'm actually looking at this currently, as in today, I was running the data, which is we have a lot of survey data that it's been collected from students over the last couple years from the KBAI course that tells us how they feel about the feedback they're getting from these videos. And in KBAI, we know that they're using the Nano-tutors, so it's very important. But what about a course like HCI in the OMSCS program that doesn't use Nano-tutors? So we're looking at these two things so that we can kind of understand what is Nano-tutors doing, if anything, right? And move forward from there. And then, is there a measurable difference between courses that use Nano-tutors and courses that do not, like I said, and how they perceive the overall helpfulness of these course videos? But there's so much potential here, right? You can line up a million different questions to these areas, and that's kind of the point I'm getting at, is that to really understand how learning's happening in an online course or even a program, we need to get a holistic view. And a map or a framework such as the community of inquiry model is a fantastic map for that. We can begin to put things into individual areas, but then we can also move toward that sweet spot in the middle that'll help us understand what's actually working. We know what desirable learning behaviors that we want to aim for. We know the perceptions and the practices. How can we identify the tools? How can we identify from the teaching end what we can make available to students such that they can succeed there where everything kind of interacts? So finally, in closing, I'd like to ask you all, so what are some new models of learning that we can discover by introducing new technologies into education? So a lot of what we see in KBAI was developed because we approached education through an AI perspective. We didn't rely entirely on conventional education research. While it did guide us, the idea was to use a new perspective, help us make new tools and new technologies to see how they worked in this space, hopefully toward identifying solutions to those issues that we know plague online education, and specifically, I'm going to say online learning, right? We really want our students to learn, and we want to find new ways to facilitate that. And what are new domains or some other perspectives that we can do to do that, or use to do that? Thank you. So I'll open up to questions or comments or anything. Yes?
I have two questions. I mean, you were mentioning the threshold above which kind of quality indicators are going down. Do you have a sense of what the threshold is? And the second question is, I do not really understand what a nano-tutor is. Could you give an example?
Yes, so let me get your first one first. So when we say threshold is, I don't know the exact numbers. This wasn't my study, but what we found basically was there was at some point over time, the first semester, if we say we had 200 students, and the second semester we had like 500 or so. That's just rough numbers. But as it grew, so as the class got bigger, the complexity of all the posts started to lower, right? And so what we're interested in now moving forward is exactly finding that point. What is that sweet spot? But also, just because it lowers doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, right? Because if we need to know exactly how the students are interacting, right? If they're lowering, does that mean that maybe they're interacting more? Is the quality of discussion is in question here. We need to know, the rate at which the discussion is going as well, and then also to discuss with students themselves about how they perceive those communications. So there's a lot going on there. As far as nano-tutor, what we mean when we say nano-tutor is when you go through a video, you'll get to points where it'll ask you a question, and you can actually interact and put stuff into the video itself and submit your answer, and it'll give you feedback on that answer, on whether you're right or wrong, how you can adjust your answer to get toward the right answer. Try again, here's what we think you did. And so there is some analysis going on there that's basically looking at your answer, seeing the difference between your answer and the actual answer, and trying to guide you toward the right answer. So there is some scaffolding going on there. And so there's about 6 to 7 of these in each video lesson. They're like micro, so they're very specific. They're content specific to those specific lessons themselves. But we have seen that they really do, the students really like them, and that they seem to perceive them as very helpful in their overall education.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes?
Nice job, Marissa. I appreciate all the work that you're doing here. Follow up to the first question.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's not your stuff.
Oh, it's fine.
But how did you measure complexity?
Right. So she used two dimensions. Excuse me. The first was discourse quality. So the words, actually analyzing the words and there's a scale out there that that is available for the difficulty of the words put together and like, so how complex is your sentence structure? And then there was also sentiment analysis that she used so she can measure the sentiment of the sentence overall to see if this was conducive to a discussion overall, or a long-term discussion versus just a, like just a comment, syntactic, or just saying, oh, I don't like this, or I do like this, versus I don't like this because X, Y, Z. What's your feedback, or what do you guys think? And I believe she's going to be continuing this further and pushing this so we can get more information on that. But she has a paper out, right?
Marissa, if I can add just
Yeah.
a little bit. So there are two questions going on here. When the OMSCS program started, there were only 200 students in the program. Now there are 8,000 students. So one question is, how much can we expand the program and get retain good qualified staff? The other question is, over time, one of the concerns often made about the OMS program is that students are doing well because these are highly qualified students, they're older and more mature. Another question is, how does the quality of discourse in the Piazza Forum, or students more generally, with the quality of discourse in the Piazza Forum being an indication, compare with their representatives? So, like Marissa says correctly, what we found is that one, the quality of discourse in the Piazza Forum for the online students is declining ever so slowly. It is declining, but very slowly. Initially, it was higher than their residential students, and now it's just about equal.
Right, and so let me again piggyback off this, because this is very interesting, and it deals again with the community of inquiry model, which is we need to understand what tools are available, right, and what students are using, what's at their disposal. This is a good example because over time, students have started moving to Slack to have one-on-one interactions, but they still go to Piazza, to the discussion forum, to have those inquiries, right? So I have a question about this, I have a question about that, logistics, etc. So there's a question then is the quality of discourse changing because we've introduced new tools to the course that they are now offloading some of that conversation to? We don't know. But it's an interesting question, and it's worth asking and finding some kind of answer to. So it's really hard to identify exactly why it's happening, but we do know it is. Yeah.
So I was wondering, sometimes it's hard to measure quality of discourse if you're using just a mechanical measure that looks at sentence structure and vocabulary. Because as you get a broader and more diverse population, it could be that people are intentionally having a quality discourse, but in simpler language, to make sure everybody gets it.
Right.
So this is the usual measure of whether the discourse is happening at the 5th grade level, 6th grade level, or 8th grade level, the usual test of complexity. What we have just begun to do is to ask ourselves a question, is the content of the discussions changing?
So the semantic value.
The semantic value, and we don't yet have an answer.
Yeah.
We are also moving forward into recruiting students themselves to give us more information, kind of more depth of information on those actual discourses so that we can get that extra layer of understanding and insight too.
So you don't do anything to separate the populations, right? So these are students that are sometimes taking online courses.
No, everything that we did here was OMSCS. We do have the research to show versus the on-campus or compared to the on-campus.
I was interested in the mixing. So,
Right.
so one way to explain the decline is this regression of mean. So they have two separate experiences.
Yeah.
In their heads, they're mixing those experiences, and that's what you're seeing.
Yeah, that's actually something we can see now because so for those who don't know, that the on-campus students for KBAI, there's now two sections. There's the online section and there's the resident section, but all for on-campus students. We're all using one Piazza Forum. So we actually can get real data from this specific interaction of those students who are used to taking classes in face-to-face, but are in an online section. How do they react to a Piazza discussion forum? How are they interacting versus those students who usually take online courses because they're part of the OMSCS course, right? And so there's just a lot of questions going on there about those interactions, but now because of this extra section that we just got this semester, we can do even more data analysis in comparison because prior to, it was two different populations, right? And so it was very hard to make any kind of a claim there, whereas now we know it's one population. Yeah.
Do you guys also look at how the size of the classroom impacted the frequency of Piazza posts in addition to the quality?
Yes, we did. So interestingly enough, I don't have the data on hand, and Ashok, you can probably correct me on this. We were concerned that we thought that as the course grew, that the discussion would grow. What we found is it actually didn't grow. Am I correct? I remember, yeah, it actually lowered.
On average, a class of about 300 students is posting about 10,000, 11,000 messages over the semester. The numbers are declining now, and like Marissa said, one primary reason we think, we're not sure, is that students are shifting to Slack, many of them. And I don't know how to do that measurement about whether the decline is occurring because they're shifting to a different technology or it's lack of motivation. I'm not sure.
It's very hard to quantify because I mean, if you think about a face-to-face classroom, how much of that interaction is social, right? It's very hard to say depending on the class. So what we see on the Slack side is that a lot of it is the social, right? The kind of getting to know your peers and your classmates. But so then the discussion forum ends up being just the query end. And there was a lot of concern on our team was how is this going to work? How's this going to impact our research? And how's this going to impact the students' education and their learning quality? However, when we think about residential classrooms, it's really not that different in terms of like what they say and do in the classroom itself. But yeah, that kind of the lowering of the response or the question asking rate did concern us a little bit. But because we don't have all the information yet and know exactly how it's happening, we're holding off on making any claims or anything like that. So, yes.
I want to shift back to the Nano-tutor and to ask sort of a specific question, which would lead to understanding how or whether that's going to make things more scalable, particularly to other subject areas. So the Nano-tutor, is that adaptive learning developed through machine learning or through expertise?
Expertise.
So what are the questions that normally are asked and so on? Reaches that?
Right.
And how expensive is it? I mean, how hard would it be to take all this you're doing it for one class,
Yes.
right?
Right.
You do it for principles of economics.
So I can actually answer this. Yeah. So we did an experiment last year where we did try to develop multiple cognitive tutors that were programming language agnostic. You can put into your own domain. It's a very expensive task to do that. These were not developed using machine learning. These were expertise based. So someone went through and actually made them knowing. So yes, very resource intense. However, the idea was we want to give the students expert feedback, right? And when you think about traditional MOOCs or any other like forms of online education that are large and at scale, it's very hard to do that with actually interacting with the professor themselves. And so the cost trade-off for us was to create these nano-tutors. We could provide them that expert feedback at scale. Even though the cost was upfront for those tutors themselves, we can now provide them to many more students whenever they need them on this content specifically. Now, as for developing it further and like using something like machine learning to produce them, it's definitely an open question. I think we've talked about it a couple times.
Yeah, just to add to that, in the knowledge base AI class, there are about 100 nano-tutors. So that gives you some idea of the scale that we're talking about. A student encounters a nano-tutor every 8 minutes on average. So you learn a concept, you learn a skill, and immediately there is an exercise. And as the student is trying to pick various choices, he or she interacts with the nano-tutor. If the student makes an incorrect choice, so the nano-tutor is based on the notion of misconceptions. So there is a conception and a skill, and we have some idea of what kind of misconceptions students have, and so we use expertise in the nano-tutor to recognize when a student has a misconception and address it. It took about 250 hours of work, that's an estimate, to develop these 100 nano-tutors. So that gives you some idea about the scale.
Again, from expertise.
From
as
expertise.
opposed to machine learning.
I would like to add something to that. I mean, if I understand the concept of the nano-tutor correctly, I developed one in Qualtrics, so you can use a study instrument and develop your own nano-tutor. And it's really not, it is work intensive, but you use it forever.
That's the thing, is you can use it for,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just another point, which you're going to probably disagree with. There are a number of publishers that are actually developing all this. So I think the interface, for instance, in economics, there's some publishers that are really developing a whole, library of nano-tutors. So we don't have to do it ourselves. We can integrate with others in the community that are developing these kind of libraries.
yeah, so that's something that I don't know if we've talked about at large about that, but It's like basically you're building a case library of nano-tutors that then students can, but then you have to, there's questions about the expertise of those nano-tutors, right? Like the accuracy of them. So that was something that we thought about. We considered was like, if we had others develop these out, how can we ensure the quality across the board of each one for students when they're exposed to these things? We don't want to perpetuate misconceptions, and so that's a concern that we had, was that if we come across a misconception, what happens if we accidentally reinforce it? And so there's a lot of questions. I think the question of nano-tutors is kicking off again right now because I'm kind of like in the middle of that research. We really, really want to understand exactly to what extent they're impacting the student's experience. Because if we can tell, if we have some objective, some quantifiable measure where we can say, we know now that it's X amount of points that they're increasing in student performance moving forward, we can, not that we shouldn't before then, but we can now start to think about new methods for the development of them to make them maybe more efficient or development more efficient. Because I mean, I've taken the class, right, that uses these nano-tutors, and it makes a world of difference just to have that immediate formative feedback or that formative assessment feedback on a concept. When I think I've got it and then I do this problem and I don't got it, then I can think about it again and reiterate and fix it. And so that's really nice, and it really does.
I think this is the essence of effective teaching. That's what I think a good teacher is able to do, is to hear that and say, oh, they're probably thinking this, that's because they missed this. So I think it's really the kernel.
Yeah. Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, first I want to say it was a great talk.
Oh, thank you.
And also you have me thinking about the idea of causality here. Because, I mean, we're sort of led to believe so far that larger courses lead to directly cause lower engagement or quality engagement. And I guess playing devil's advocate, I have doubts.
I do too.
So and I assume you did too.
Yeah.
So I was hoping to hear you maybe think about ways you have or ways you could in the future add a little more nuance to that sort of causal claim. So larger courses with these types of posts or other ways to sort of arrive at a more nuanced causality.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that we need to think about too is why is there this perception of larger courses meaning lower quality education, right? It didn't come out of nowhere, right? I mean, a lot of the data shows that students did not do well in larger courses, right? But I think what a lot of people don't know or they don't talk about, don't talk about is that the courses that they're enrolled in are kind of a one-size-fits-all. Right? We think about XMOOCs, that's what they do, is that you have one way of learning and that's it. You have to use it, that's all that's made available. And that doesn't work, right? And so one of the things that we're trying to push for in this, and KBAI is an example of scalable learning in a lot of the tools and methods that we use. And one of the reasons why is because it can be used in multiple classes and it can still add that individualized, personalized manner to an extent. Such as like the use of the nano-tutors or having a teacher basically on hand whenever you need it, using an artificial agent to respond to questions whenever you have them. And so those are two things I know specifically that were issues with larger scale courses that led to that negative perception. I don't think that everyone is against online education and against large scale or at scale education. It's just that thus far there hasn't been a lot of evidence to show that it can work. And so our hope through our research, and mine specifically, is to kind of change that perception, at least in the OMSCS program, because it is kind of pushing and piloting this new area, this new domain of education at higher education, certainly. But it's huge, and it keeps growing. There's a lot of people enrolled. And I want to make sure that they're getting quality education, and I want to make sure people can see that we are providing them that quality education. And I think I saw a hand over here. Yes?
A question about the artificial intelligence tutors.
Yep.
Was there any instance where that tutor was not able to answer the question?
Yes.
What happened?
Right. So, do you want to answer this or? Okay. So this, there's like a confidence interval. She will only answer if she knows the answer. It does happen on occasion that she has she's dropped the ball, right? When that happens, we step in, right? The thing is, like the first semester it came out, people didn't know that it was an AI. Everyone who's in the class now kind of understands there's something going on. They don't know who it is. Could be a teacher, could be a student, who knows, But so when you see something that happens, I don't think it shocks students. It doesn't shock us. We know it's going to happen. Mostly because there are students who go into the class now and whose sole purpose is to try to like weed it out by having the most complex English sentences you can think of. I think I'll give you an example. One of our lab members, Bobby, published a paper on this on the in the AI ethics division. But basically what she said, AI, or Jill Watson, doesn't care if you're pregnant. Was that what it was? I don't remember exactly what happened. Someone was saying that they're having a baby soon, or they just had a baby, or they just they're pregnant. They were celebrating on the board, and Jill Watson responded in the most ridiculous manner. Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, I remember the story. So there have been several versions of Jill Watson. First version just answered questions. Newer version also responds to student introductions. So in the first week, we asked all the students to introduce themselves. And if there are 500 students, then just answering all the 500 students takes off the race. Somebody has to answer. So Jill Watson can now automatically respond to about 50 to 60% of student introductions. So male students said that I'm excited about taking this class.
Oh yes, this is what it was, yeah.
But my wife and I are expecting a baby, and I don't know how that will interact with my taking the class. And Jill Watson's response was, welcome to the class, and welcome also to the new addition to your family. Now the female student said, I'm expecting a baby, and I don't know how that will interact with the class. And Jill Watson simply said, welcome to the class, nothing with the baby. So that surprised us, why would she have such different answers? And I took some time to understand it. The reason is, like Marissa said right in the beginning, about 85% of the students in the OMSCS program are male students. So that means that most of the data that Jill Watson is familiar with in terms of previous student introductions and previous questions coming from male students. It so happened that at that particular snapshot in time, there was a question that a previous male student had said about my wife and expecting a baby, and a human TA had answered, welcome to the addition to family. No female student previously had said that in that many words, and therefore she didn't know what to do. So this is an example where the algorithms are just fine. But the data has some built-in biases because of the demographic population distribution of the demographic.
Her ontology wasn't fully fleshed out to be able to accommodate that. So.
And so, of course, when we found out about it, we were appalled by it, right? That she would give different answers.
It seems so rude.
Since then, we have taken corrective measures, but
We just have a very insensitive TA, apparently. So. Yep. Yeah.
Yes. I just have to raise some takers regarding the effectiveness of the online course.
Mm-hmm.
And since that they found online course actually make a student performance worse, but apparently you have the opposite conclusion. So some argument is that they are missing some self-regulation characteristics of the student,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard to measure these variables. And I don't know what to do with that, or if there's some.
Right. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to. I want to look into this further using some kind of model to understand exactly how that's working, because it's not enough to identify that these things that students have these different behaviors, right? We want to identify is there something that's going on in the course that's fostering these behaviors, that is impacting them, that's influencing them? How can we foster them in students? How can we get them to that point? So knowing them when they go into the course and then when they go out, exactly what do they interact with during that time, that we can help maybe identify this component or this element we know is impacting, or we suspect is impacting, this perception or this practice. And when we're dealing with KBAI, these are graduate students. I mean, some of them are undergrads, not for the OMSCS, but certainly for the on-campus version. And because we are dealing with now the on-campus version as well, we can gather that data. But I will say, I'm also now looking into the 1301 course, which is strictly as undergraduate and is introduction to programming. And then there's also the open 1301 course, right, for anyone all over, doesn't matter if they're in school or not, that wants to take this course online, that they can. And so we're trying to get as much data and information as possible so we can look across the board at students at various levels of education. How are they interacting with these components? How do they measure on these practices scales? And what are they working with that might impact those practices? Right?
We'll have to leave it there.
Yes.
Let's have another round of applause for Marissa.
Thank you.